Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. While we wait for more people to log in and get settled, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and tell us where you're joining from as you're coming in. We'll keep an eye out on the chat and see. I can start by introducing myself. I am Anna Burckhardt. I am a curatorial assistant in the Department of Architecture and Design at the Museum of Modern Art, and I am joined by my wonderful colleague and design hero, Paola Antonelli. Paola, do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, now that you said design hero, what am I supposed to say? You're my design hero. So I'm Paola Antonelli. I'm a senior curator in the Department of Architecture and Design and director of R&D at MoMA, and partner in crime of many adventures together with Anna Burckhardt.
So I see that we have people. Oh my God, people coming in from Long Island, Kristen Davis, Pia from Argentina, Calvin, he is joining us from Edmonton, Canada, from Toronto, from Queens, Patricia is joining us from Rio de Janeiro. Oh my God, Sadiq is joining us from India, from Chile, Ulrike from Berlin, Erika Caldera from Venezuela. So, oh my God, a lot of people. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we also have the Philippines in the house. Wow, great. Bangladesh. Woo.
A lot of Latin American people, which makes me happy. I'm from Colombia. From Mexico, a lot of locals also from NYC. So thank you everybody for joining us. I think if it's okay, we will start, right, Paola? So I guess one thing that we should say is that both Paola and I, along with, somebody from Colombia as well, along with Michelle Millar-Fisher, Stephanie Kramer, and Christina Parsons, we organized the exhibition Items is Fashion Modern, and we also worked on the Coursera course, which you all have kindly sort of taken and joined and shared your comments, which we are really grateful for. Throughout this session, please post your questions for us in the chat. And also feel free to use the chat to talk with other attendees. We'll get as many questions as we can within the next hour. And we'll also be covering questions that were submitted in advance. I should also let you know that several of our MoMA colleagues are present behind the scenes and they can respond to you in the chat. I think you've seen Kelly already comment a lot. Yes, you have. And so we have a few questions that were already submitted. We'll start with those, and then as you guys start submitting your questions, we can continue with those ones. We are recording this session, and we will share it in week 1, readings and resources. So if you miss anything or if you have to leave, please know that you can sort of find the whole thing there, along with some of the links that we share. And so I guess since this is our first office hours, we really wanted to take this opportunity to talk about things that we're reading and discussing in the course, but also because we are in a really unprecedented moment. I know, Paola, you don't like that phrasing, but I'll say it. It'd be really great if we could also discuss things that are happening right now and apply it to the topics of the course. And so with that, I thought maybe before I jump into the questions, I thought I would start by asking you, Paola, you have been working in design for a really long time, and you at the moment have a project called Design Emergency that is very much dealing with how designers, including fashion designers, are approaching the situation at the moment. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how it applies to the course.
Definitely. Thank you, Anna. Well, design is about life, and right now life is very tumultuous, and Anna is right. I don't like to hear unprecedented times, awkward times, but the truth is that it's all real. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes stereotypes are about conveying the truth. These are unprecedented times. And as always, design is in the thick of times because design participates both of the present and also helps build the future. So right now is a very interesting moment. First of all, I have to tell you, I believe that design is so much more than chairs and cars. So I believe that fashion is a form of design, and I believe that video games are, interfaces, data visualization, you name it. So it's really an all-encompassing form of human creative expression. And it has also very much to deal with situations of emergencies. I mean, many years ago, in 2005, at MoMA, we organized an exhibition that was called Safe Design Takes on Risk that talked about how design can help us all deal with risk and situations of danger. So right now, the crisis is an important moment to highlight the role of design. And together with one of my best friends and one of the most important figures in the world of design, critic Alice Rawsthorne, we decided to start an Instagram Live project and interview some of the people that really are having an important role right now in the world. And it's called Design.Emergency. So yesterday, for instance, I interviewed Marco Ranieri, who's an anesthesiologist and ICU expert from Bologna, who co-invented the split ventilator that enabled people to ventilate two patients at once. And Alice, at the beginning of our adventure, interviewed Alyssa Eckert, who's one of the two illustrators that are responsible for the image of the coronavirus that you all know, the one with like the Hellraiser with the spiky red S proteins. So we're looking at all sorts of design, even data visualization. And we've also looked into fashion, the CTC collective in Antwerp, because as always, fashion designers are on the front lines. I remember one of the big conclusions that we came to in the organization of items of the exhibition that this MOOC is based on is that no design history can be told without including fashion design. And fashion design has been separated from the great narrative of design for way too long. And we want to take any opportunity to really make sure that people understand that fashion is not frivolity, that fashion is not luxury only, it's also very much life. And in a situation of emergency like now, fashion is front and center together with all other design forms.
Very well said. And I think that's really interesting in the kind of things that you've chosen to highlight with Design Emergency that actually relate to this course a lot is that, for example, Alyssa's illustration has really helped people kind of like make the virus kind of physical, like a real thing. And I think also masks and PPE do that in a way as well, both sort of like in a negative way and in a positive way, right? Like it makes us more aware of the fact that we need to, be careful and sort of like respectful of other people, but at the same time, it can make it a little bit more scary, which in turn helps us take it seriously. So well done. So if it's okay, I think I'll just start. Let me know what you think, Paola, but I'll just start with the questions that have been submitted.
Absolutely, yeah, there's so many. So thank you very much because they're very stimulating also.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you guys taking the time. And so I'll start with, so Anne-Marie asks, and I'll read it because it's long and it's a good question. I am a backstage dresser who works in fashion shows. Obviously, in times of COVID-19, designers, fashion models, and backstage dressers cannot collaborate at fashion events as before. What do you see as permanent changes to how fashion is presented from a marketing and events perspective? So I can start, sure. So that's a really good question. And I think one thing that Paola and I have been discussing a lot as, COVID has happened from the very beginning is that at the moment, it's really hard to kind of know what permanent changes will happen. We are really all kind of like sitting with the trouble and like understanding what it is to kind of live this reality that we're living in. But we have seen designers, as Paola just said, kind of like, answer the very direct questions, the very direct needs. And so some of the more exciting things that we've seen, for example, is fashion being taken, of course, online, as with other things. One thing that I was just telling Paola I found really, really exciting and kind of fun is Animal Crossing. I'm sure a lot of you have seen how many designers, there's like a really young New York designer called Sandy Liang who basically hosted a pop-up in Animal Crossing, and so people could go, they could kind of like modify their own pieces, but they could also, take home their own Sandy Liang pieces. And not only is this, a fun way to spend quarantine, but it also makes fashion a little bit more, I don't know if democratic is the word, but a little bit more accessible to everybody. And so obviously sort of like the digital world has been everybody's first response, including museums. I'm sure a lot of you have seen also that we are currently during Paris Fashion Week, and the New York Times just basically published an article where you can see all the presentations online. So I think those are the ways in which designers and, you know, engineers and journalists are addressing, and, you know, everybody that works in the fashion industry are addressing the very direct, kind of like very immediate needs. As we all know, the fashion industry has basically stopped. There are a lot of people that are out of a job, as, you know, Anne-Marie also says. And so I think everybody's kind of like trying to figure out how to address things that are happening now. And it can only sort of like take a little bit of time until we kind of see what permanent lasting changes this will bring. Do you agree, Paola? What do you think?
So I'm completely in agreement. Yesterday I was, there's so much content online right now that it's hard to pick and choose. And I've been, just like everybody else, very much ADD in scattered, you know, from one to the other. But I was watching something that I didn't think would draw me in, which was a short movie that was done by Maria Grazia Curie with a director for Dior, and it was so beautiful. So I was thinking, I'm kind of happy because, you know, once upon a time, this kind of haute couture fashion shows were the symbol of elitism. Like, you had to be Anna Wintour or some other big editor, have the money to go to Paris, had the pull to be able to be admitted into the show, wait for hours because the show would always be late. It's so great to see this access that, by the way, is happening at the same time as so much of the fashion establishment is being slowly but surely taken down by other protests like Black Lives Matter. And, you know, everything's changing in a really interesting time. What I am wondering is how the business model is going to cope. That's what I'm really wondering, because as you all know who are online, because you work like we work, we need to make sure that our dreams can become reality by also dealing with economy and with financial situations. So to me, the interesting bit is how this great creativity that is now funneled and put online will be able to materialize in sales. That's the big question mark that I have. Right? Anna, what do you think about that?
I agree. And I think one thing that you said that made me think as well is the sort of like the kind of like rethinking of the establishment. One thing that has me hopeful, and I hope it'll sort of like materialize, we'll see, is the sort of like new, it's a very old age approach, but it has, people have sort of like started to focus a lot on craft, right? Craft at home. We're all crafting our own masks, but also, you know, couture is basically what it is craft. It's just a very sort of like inaccessible, expensive sort of craft. And I think maybe we could sort of like start seeing those principles, those really beautiful principles of the handmade, of something that it's available to all of us, be trickled down in a way that like maybe we have more customization. Maybe our pieces will be a bit more individual for each of us. Maybe we'll start making more of our own clothes, or maybe designers will have to sort of like, as you said, Paola, bring everything down to the more local, to the more kind of like personalized and more sustainable, perhaps.
And, you know, it might also happen because with everything that's going on and the turmoil that we can see also, for instance, in New York City, I think that many designers will start self-producing. Maybe we'll see a renaissance of small stores. That's what I'm hoping. Also, another thing that I wanted to see, that's the problem. You give us one question and then we start talking forever. But in Design Emergency, we also have something we call Pick of the Week. You know, every week we talk about something that we've seen or listened to that could be relevant to the design in COVID-19 pandemic theme. And last week we took the covers of British Vogue that were all about nature. So all of a sudden, British Vogue, instead of having model already before they had the month before they had first responders. I mean, it was already quite a revolutionary take on the Vogue cover. But instead, you know, this month they had images of nature, images of landscape, no human beings. It was all about the world we live in, whether it's a city or nature. And I like very much this shift of perspective from the garment to the people that might not be able to wear that garment but are interested in it, to the world at large. You know, so this is really, as Anna said, hopeful.
Very well said. So I guess, so from the chat, Mirna is asking us, what new things have you learned during this pandemic, which I think has to do with what you were saying, Paola. I mean, we have learned a lot about working from home and about, you know, ourselves in a time of crisis. But I'm wondering, Paola, as you work with Alice on Design Emergency, is there something that has sort of like made you change your mind about design and designers, or like change your approach towards the way that you curate, or not really?
Not at all. Actually, it kind of reinforced my stance and Alice's stance. I mean, we've always been truly interested in also forms of design that are not necessarily formally elegant immediately, you know. So we have a say, also with Anna, that the opposite of beautiful is not ugly, but it's lazy. So sometimes you have these kind of like monster designs that are just so brilliant. I'm thinking of some of the solutions for physical distancing. You know, some are ridiculous, but they're so brilliant. You know, like a Paris cafe that puts gigantic teddy bears as customers so that they keep the distance in the table. So you see a lot. What I find really interesting is how people have rediscovered their homes by, you know, they were forced to rediscover their homes and forced to live together, forced to negotiate space in small apartments, as it happens here in New York, take turns being online because these microphones pick up everything. So it really is a new way of living together, which I feel has come out of this pandemic. And then there are the silly things. Before, well, we were preparing to go online, and I see that actually there's also a question from Ulrike that is also asking, will lockdown spark lasting change in how comfort is prioritized in clothing? And for example, will bras be viewed as less mandatory? That's very funny, because there was this article on The Guardian just a few days ago about women will not go back to wearing bras. I don't know. I think it's just funny. We were disagreeing.
Yeah.
Anna and I had to
on opposite ends of that discussion. I am for no.
Exactly. I am for like, yeah, you know. So but I just find it really interesting, because they were trying to link today with the burning bras in the 70s. And I'm like, it's not really the same thing, but it's fascinating. I do believe that it's going to be hard for New Yorkers to go back to stiletto heels. Although I have to say that we started going back to work last week, and Midtown is not very populated, but there are a few stilettos around already. I know, I was surprised, I have to say.
I am. I mean, one thing that I was going to say until you just said this is that I have read some articles that do say like athleisure is going to become the thing, because we're all now really really used to just wearing comfortable clothes. And I could see that being the case for me, even though
I don't know. Come on, yeah. You have clothes in the closet that you've been dying to wear. I mean, I have to say, ever since we did items, ever since we organized the show, I banned stilettos. I was not wearing them that much before, but after reading what's behind stiletto heels, I'm like, you know, I'm not gonna go there anymore. But there are some clothes that I really miss wearing.
Yeah, no, me too. I have to say, like, I don't miss wearing jeans, for example, but there are a lot of things that I see in my closet and I'm like, oh. Okay, I'll keep going so that we can actually answer as many questions as possible. So Katerina says, I couldn't help but notice that there is not a gloves dedicated page session week, which is very interesting, as this fashion item is being reinvented in light of the COVID crisis. This is a really good question, actually, and it really had me thinking. The question, so thank you for asking, it really kind of like encompasses the two kind of things that are happening at the moment, with both COVID and the Black Lives Matter protests. You were right, we did not include gloves in either the exhibition or the MOOC. But one thing that Paola and I and everybody that works on the show always says is that really the list is not exhaustive. It's our own subjective list, and we really encourage people to add their own, as some of you have done in the course. But our great colleague Michelle Miller-Fisher, she very, very much advocated for a really long time for the Black Power glove that was worn by athletes John Carlos and Tommy Smith in the Olympics in Mexico. When they won the silver medal, basically they protested, the silver and gold medal, sorry, they protested by raising their fist up wearing a black glove. And we had it on we thought about it for a while, but we actually realized that what we wanted to convey with that item was also conveyed through the Colin Kaepernick jersey, which is both in the show and in the MOOC. But that was sort of like the glove that we had at the moment. And we decided that, you know, the Colin Kaepernick was like a very powerful piece, and we just decided to go with that story. But I know that Katerina is asking about gloves, particularly in relation to hygiene, of course, which has become an increasing awareness for all of us. And the theme of hygiene was something that we very much wanted to explore as well in both the MOOC and the exhibition. And both Michelle and I very, very much pushed for the sock as a sort of like representation of hygiene.
Wait, not any sock, the tube sock. You had that, like, oh my God, you were like really on a tear.
I was upset. I know, we really wanted to. And one of the reasons for it is because, you know, and we can share that link. It has been like, it's very well known that throughout both World War I and World War II, a huge cause of like fatality for soldiers, it wasn't actually the fighting, it was actually because they didn't have any proper socks.
Yeah,
and so,
sepsis. Yeah, sepsis. Exactly. And yeah.
Exactly. So we were like so excited that this was going to be like our story to tell of hygiene. But then in the end, it did not work out. We couldn't really actually find a good stereotype that really resonated. And so we saved it for later. And a lot of you actually, as we asked, what item do you think? I think it was through Instagram, Paola, right? That we asked what item is missing. And the one that won was the sock.
It's very funny. But also I would like to say something else about gloves. It's interesting because there are different garments that have become crucial in the course of this pandemic. I would say that the number one garment or object that is absolutely fundamental is the face mask. That, you know, we actually retained at MoMA, as we were preparing to go back to the museum and to reopen, we retained an expert, a doctor from Mount Sinai that has helped us devise all the protocols for both people that work at MoMA and the visitors that will come to us. And it's interesting because gloves are kind of discouraged because they give you a false sense of security, and you end up touching your face, which is what you have to learn not to do, and washing your hands less. So masks always, face shield, good idea. Gloves less. And instead wash, sanitize. So it's fascinating. It's almost in this pandemic, if I were to put my money on one garment, it would be the face masks, which have also become an interesting fashion accessory.
And so on that topic, actually, Paola, Komal is asking us, well, there are two really good questions about masks. And so I'll start with one that we could maybe answer faster. Basically, he says, face masks are worn for a long period of time and therefore cause skin problems like rashes. So what kind of materials and designs for masks not only protect us from the virus, but also keep the skin safe and look fashionable at the same time? Do you have an opinion on that, Paola? I know that there have been a lot of like medical studies that say 3 layers, one with cotton, the other one with, you know, but.
Well, yeah, no, definitely. So masks are worn to protect ourselves from others and to protect others from ourselves, right? So when it comes to protect others from ourselves, a face cover of any kind, either the bandana, might work some because it stops the little droplets that are most infectious. So of course, you know, a t-shirt is less good than real, you know, higher thread count cotton. Silk is not very protective, but you know, you can get away. If you want to protect yourselves from others, the 3-ply and the 3-layer mask is advised. Of course, the N95 we talked a lot about, but those are really for medical workers. Personally, I have to tell you, there's a lot of fashionable masks that I have, of course, bought, but this is still my favorite. I have to say it's the one that allows me to breathe when I'm walking in the street and I'm going a little fast. There is something that I am looking, oh, I have it here, perfect. This is something that I bought. So one of the problems is that after a while, the masks really rub onto your ears, but I bought this thing, this little plastic thing, which is an extender. So basically you put it like this, and you wear your mask, instead of wearing it, you wear it around your neck.
Oh,
I'm wearing lipstick right now, so I don't want to put it on, but basically it enables you to wear it as a crown, as a low crown, as opposed to wearing it under, because the doctor advised us to consider masks that you tie, right? Because to actually solve that problem, but those are a little bit, laborious. So that's another thing. And some masks that are sold online on Etsy, they have these kind of devices that you can buy with them.
that's great. And so, okay, I will there are a lot of questions about masks, so I'll try to sort of like group them together. Monica is asking.
By the way, this is in the MoMA collection, and it's been there for a while. Just wanted since items, because it was part of items. Sorry, go ahead.
Exactly. And as I'm sure you've all read the sort of like surgical mask text on the course. So, if you have any comments to what Paola just said, feel free to just, pop them on the chat. But so Monica is asking, wearing a face mask has become politicized among some people rather than a public health issue. What can be done to reverse this? Which is a good question, but a big one, of course. I think there are a lot of reasons why, wearing a mask in countries like the United States and a lot of Western countries has not become a sort of a common thing. Obviously, politics is one. I think also at the beginning, the narrative of the pandemic was a bit different than it is now. It was seen as something that really was needed for medical personnel. Also, maybe people, associated with somebody that was sick and didn't want to seem that way. But of course, it is a political issue, and it is a kind of a cultural issue as well. Monica is also asking, why is it more common in Asia than it is here? And I think at the sort of crux of that is a kind of like emphasis on community versus an emphasis on individualism. As Paola was saying, in Asian countries, the mask has been, prevalent for a really long time. In China, actually, it has been worn for public health emergencies since the beginning of the 20th century. And as obviously pollution increased, it's becoming a day-to-day thing. But as Paola was saying, people really wear it out of civic duty, out of respect for everybody else, because it doesn't really protect you from getting sick. It protects somebody else from getting sick from you, right? And I think in countries like here, and Paola, feel free to jump in whenever you don't agree, there is very much an emphasis on the individual, and therefore it is seen as more of an imposition. And we've seen that in all these like town halls in Florida where they where they, for example, compare it to the hijab, and they also see the hijab as an imposition, even though in many cases it's really not. So I think there's that dichotomy that has made it really, really difficult for people to kind of like embrace the mask in countries like the US. And the way to change that, I think, would be to change the narrative. What do you think, Paola?
You said it perfectly. It's changing the narrative, and to change behaviors, you need to really work slowly and consistently, and it's a matter of examples and role models. And as we know very well, we don't have such great role models when it comes to wearing masks. So I think, Anna, you said it perfectly. It's a different sense of collective interest.
Yeah, completely. And I think, for example, in the course, we talk about the surgical mask as well in the same sort of module as we talk about the hijab for this precise reason, right? Because the hijab, for most people in the US, it might seem like an imposition, like a lack of agency, but it really is the opposite, right? It's something that actually creates a separation from the wearer and the outside world, right? And that creates a sort of comfort and like security for the wearer. And I think for the mask is kind of similar in the sense that like it creates the separation, but the protection actually goes to the rest of us. Okay, I'll keep a lot of questions about masks. Monica is also asking, is making fashionable face masks a way to encourage more people to wear them? How would you design masks to make them more popular? I'll leave that to you, Paola.
No, it's a very good, definitely. And I was uptown in the Upper East Side some days ago, and I was waiting for an appointment, and there was a playground, and I saw all these little girls just sporting these great masks, and obviously having asked mom to wear their special mask. So there is, as usual, an attractiveness in variety, in elegance. So definitely, I think that's a very good idea, as is the idea of do it yourself, right? There are so many people that are doing their own thing. It's funny because, of course, I fell in the trap too, and I bought many fabulous masks, but of course, I always go back to this at the end. I just wish I had found some at the beginning that were gray, that were super chic, and I haven't seen them anymore. But I feel that definitely it's a way to convince people. What I find really interesting is also what's going on with makeup, because all of a sudden lipstick has gone down. You know, people are not purchasing lipstick anymore, of course, and less foundation, and instead are really focusing on the eyes, which is something that we're learning from Muslim women because they've been doing that for centuries. So interesting. Yeah, I think that, as Anna said, it's about changing the narrative. It's about showing examples of devastating elegance, wearing masks, and it's about really trying to stimulate this idea of civic duty and collective interest.
Totally. And I guess at this point, I'll point everybody to Vanessa Friedman on the New York Times wrote a really great article a few months ago called "Should Masks Be a Fashion Statement?" And she explores what Paola was just saying, this idea of sort of like, we all kind of want to, you know, as we cover our face a bit more, we all kind of sort of like display our own individual style, our own individual personality. But at the same time, what are the risks of masks becoming a sort of like a capitalistic item? And like, would that make them less accessible? Would that create sort of more hierarchies that we don't want to? So it's a great article that I would recommend. I think Sarah just put it on the chat. Okay, so more questions. So from Jenny, will the pandemic change the materials and textiles used in the industry, such as more latex, more surgical style materials? It's an interesting question that I have to think about. What do you think?
Well, latex has been a difficult material for a long time because there's many people that are allergic to it. And I'm not sure. It seems to me that it's more athleisure. And if anything, you know, we have to remember that while we're having a pandemic, we're also having other crises that are overlapping. One of them is the environmental crisis. And then we have the protests that are about social justice and systemic racism. So there's a lot going on. If anything, now that you asked me this question, Jenny, and also linking to what Anna was saying before about crafts, the resurgence of crafts, and the do-it-yourself, maybe the opposite. It's going to be about more reusing, adapting of clothes that are already at home, maybe more natural materials. Yeah, we have to think about it more, but definitely I don't think that the ER aesthetics is something that we will look for, that we will seek. What do you think, Anna?
I agree. I think I will definitely, and I think this might be what Jenny was getting at, like I do think that there is a heightened, and there will continue to be a heightened awareness of hygiene and like cleanliness. And that I think will be more shown through perhaps our behaviors. Like I could already see people, you know, like showering more and like being more careful about who they are close to within their homes. And that would probably sort of, I think that might extent to what textiles we buy, but I also think that our own ideas of hygiene, they vary. Like for some people, 100% cotton is something that's very hygienic versus like for some people something that's synthetic is seen as more hygienic. So I think that'll really depend. What do you think? Okay, so here's a question that I thought also from Carla, actually. I don't know if it's the same Carla, but you were talking, Paola, about the sort of like different crises that we are living at the moment and how they intersect. Carla is asking, from what point of action should the fashion industry pronounce itself against social struggles, such as by supporting Black Lives Matter without seeking profit? Really good question. And I think something that Paola, you and I have been thinking about a lot as we kind of navigate our role as curators within the museum. One person that we always kind of look to when it comes to fashion is Pierre Moss's Kirby Jean Raymond. He is in the course, he was also in the exhibition, and he has been one of those sort of like most vocal designers from the very beginning, from even before these protests sort of like let out. But he has sort of like gotten together with other designers that are part of the CFDA, and they have sort of put together a set of demands for the members of the CFDA. And so far, I think at the moment, the sort of, I think the vision has changed. Like now it is the expectation for designers to do that and to address what is happening. I think when Kirby just first started, it really wasn't, and he was kind of like going against the current a little bit. But what do you think, Paola?
Not a little bit. He was going against the current full speed ahead. I mean, Kirby is the one that was having real, like, quotations of police violence and fake blood over his clothes in years ago. So he already had a lot to say, and he's always been really engaged in social justice. He was always also there protesting the pipeline, physically on the pipeline protesting it. So he's always seen the connection between fashion and politics as paramount and really very, very strong. And yes, I was also thinking of that CFDA council that's now being put in place to address also not even the pipeline, but just the representation and the way stereotypes and instead business agency are represented in the fashion industry. Somebody that's been talking about it for a really long time is also Imran Ahmed at the Business of Fashion, trying to cast a light on the whole world. And it's fashion, because it's such a powerful and pervasive industry, has a lot of potential to change things, and also a lot of responsibility for how things are right now. And we're, as Anna said, we're doing the same in the world of design and architecture. We're looking at how history has been told. We're looking at what has been left in the shadows. We're looking at how we can go forward and what kind of internal attitudes we need to change. And especially, we are also trying to change the we. Because when I say we, you know what I mean. It's the white, Caucasian white, even European extraction, or anyway, Western-centric view of the world. So there's also indigeneity that is very much part of our discussions right now. It's gigantic, but we believe that everything that's happening is great, because it's what we say, it's the drop that carves the stone, but now it's not even a drop anymore. It's really a waterfall. So it's a change that will not go backwards anymore.
I agree completely. And one thing that maybe we didn't touch from Carla's question that is a really difficult thing to answer, and I don't know how I would do it, but we can try, is the question of profits. So how can designers actually sort of like be engaged with these crises and at the same time make a profit? And some of it I think you touched on, Paola, the idea of like becoming smaller, going back to sort of like the mom and pop shop, things like that, being sort of like taking down their production to like the more individual, to sort of like the more customized. But it's still hard, right? Like just yesterday, I got an email from this designer telling me about her sale, and then 5 minutes later, I got another email being like, "Sorry, we shouldn't have sent that email. Here are some Black designers that you should look at." So I think designers are really struggling with how to do that, and so are we, right? We are in the middle of an economic crisis. It's really hard to actually know how we and how small businesses in particular will survive, while at the same time realizing that we all carry some sort of privilege and that we need to sort of like give our platform to people that have been more marginalized. So, I mean, we welcome your suggestions, because we also don't know. We're kind of seeing as things go by, right, Paola?
Definitely. And, whenever there's a crisis, there's an undeniable catastrophe and a selection that is not that natural. It's forced, but hopefully new business models will emerge from that. And those business models will stay with us in the future, and they will be vital for the industry. I don't know what's going to happen with the big conglomerates. I don't know what's going to happen when it comes to the fashion designers that were in a big turnover, hired by fashion companies and then dismissed after 2 years. That's really interesting. I mean, it's really a gigantic change that is happening.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Okay, so another question from Blossom. She says, do you think there will be a new rise of cool hunting since COVID-19 changed the trend market of 2020? That's a hard one. I will say that I mean, cool hunting is it's kind of a hard thing to kind of understand, and I'm sure a lot of designers use it. I'm sure others don't. One thing that I was reading about recently was a interview on NPR with fashion historian Kimberly Chisholm Campbell, and one thing that she was saying is that really what dictates fashion changes in, like, extreme changes in fashion aren't really trends. Trends are kind of made up in a way. What really dictates fashion is this, of course, the social and economic situation and like our circumstances. You know, she was talking about, and it's something that we also speak about in the exhibition and in the course. She was talking about, you know, how the new, like, it was really the rationing of World War II that gave way to Dior's new look, which was all about opulence and all about sort of like using as much fabric as you could and like accentuating the figure. And I think that will happen here. We still have yet to see what big changes you will see in sort of like in terms of kind of like the aesthetics of fashion, and I'm sure different designers will have their own interpretation, but obviously it will like the situation, both economic and social, will, as Paola was saying, it will be visible. Okay, let's see, what other question? From Rudy. In the same way comfort may become more prioritized in fashion, would dressing more conservatively also be more of a trend, since we may not be going out as much anymore?
Wait, when you stay at home, you're less conservative, right? You do. I mean, you don't even know what I'm wearing under my shirt. I'm kidding. I'm wearing bottoms personally. So I'm just laughing because there were all these stories about news anchor that are like in their underwear. You know, it's interesting because modest fashion was already something very important beforehand. Like for the past few years, it's been one of the ways to really think of what was more appropriate and also more interesting in fashion design. So I don't think that the pandemic will stress that, quite the opposite, because the home is where you can be less conservative. But I am glad that it was something that people were paying attention at even beforehand, because it has to do with open-mindedness and understanding other cultures. Because, you know, modest fashion was a way to adapt fashion to other cultures, not only to, once again, Caucasian, Western centric, blah, 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 but also to think of religions and cultures that are other than ours. Agree?
Totally. Yeah, I completely agree. And I do think this is like completely, you know, biased opinion. I'm always for more comfortable clothing, especially for women. So, you know, it might be a welcome change, but we'll see. Again, some people, I'm sure you've seen, I think one of the forums in the course was talking about how, you know, there's been a whole lot of blogs and a lot of like journalists that are talking about, what are you wearing during quarantine? Are you wearing sweatpants, or are you actually like dressing up as if you were going to work? And a lot of people were very like encouraging of people actually fully dressing up. And I think it just really depends on personality. Some people really embraced that and like took their selfies and posted it and like loved dressing up. And other people were like, no way, I'm just gonna wear my sweatpants. So we'll see what happens.
What I find really interesting is how, you know, influencers had to pivot, because all of a sudden, right, it seems so tone deaf to see the usual influencer pictures. And at the same time, some of them could not pivot to a more interior life, not only because of the surroundings, but also because of what they needed to express, which was some depth, right? That was fascinating.
I agree. I mean, one of the funniest things of this whole thing was that how this actor, Leslie, what's his name? Leslie Jordan, just like an older man who is just really funny on Instagram, became a huge thing because people were just needing that sort of like respite from other things. Like they wanted to laugh as opposed to like looking at beautiful clothing or buying more stuff, because a lot of us can't really buy in this economy. And so it just really changed people's priorities. And as Paola said, the influencer industry really had to reckon with that, which was really interesting. Okay, I'll keep going because we have a lot of questions. Susan says, I'm interested in your views on sexism and establishment of gender stereotypes in fashion and how this might be changing. It's a big question.
I mean, I can start saying something. I have realized, I'm Italian, coming from, my parents are not particularly conservative, but my country is. So a lot of gay people, but that's it, so male, female, gay female, right? So I came to this country. I mean, already there were really interesting examples of fashion that was more convertible or at least fluid, but I realized coming to this country how interested I am in gender fluidity, and how, even though I'm a cis woman, I've been with the same man for 25 years, but whenever I see that kind of fluidity, I'm filled with some inner joy, because I tell you that my country, beautiful as it is very sexist. And I see this fluidity as a better future, because when there will be no more genders, there will be real equity. Until then, I'm not sure that sexism will be beat. It's going to take quite a long time, but fashion, once again, can help. And seeing that there's not anymore really that kind of concern about even cis men wearing skirts or wearing or just letting out some of their expressive and creativity, it just fills me with joy. So when it comes to the external expression with clothes, it's like that. When it comes to the internal sexism in the establishment, in the industry, that's another matter. What do you think, Anna, about what I'm saying? And
I agree. And one thing that I was thinking, and it's something that really we explored during items, is that, the issue of gender is obviously a big one with fashion, and it changes a lot, right? So for example, Paola, you were talking about the burning of the bras. That is like a gender issue. And I, as somebody that hates bras, I'm like, yes, let's stop wearing bras. But you think differently because your experience is different. And I think that will always be the case when we talk about gender and fashion. One example that I will give from the course and from the exhibition is the bikini versus the burkini, right? They were both really very gendered items, of course, and very culturally charged items in their time. The bikini, obviously, when it came out in the 40s, people were shocked to see it. And, you can see people, photos of police arresting women on the beach for wearing a bikini, because at the time, that was what was seen as transgression. And, 60, 70 years later, you actually see pictures of the same beach, but women wearing burkinis, so fully covered up, and then also being arrested by police people. Yeah. So, we think that sometimes there's, police officers. We sometimes like to think that we have come a long way when it comes to gender, particularly within fashion. But then another set of cultural guidelines kick in, or a new experience comes in, and then we have to go back. So I think when it comes to fashion,
that's true. And I'm also thinking of the Le Smoking, so the Yves Saint Laurent Le Smoking from the 1960s. Great, but still a woman wearing a tuxedo is still a model of reference that is androgynous. So it still involves that kind of binary view of male, female, right? So in a way, right now, what I like to see is clothes worn by all genders equally, besides also being delighted by the success of fluid models like Harry Neff and so on and so forth. I also, we talk about fluidity of gender, then there's the fluidity of ethnic background, and the fact that they're so, you can't tell anymore whether somebody is male or female, and who cares, and you can't know anymore where somebody is coming from, or the makeup, and it doesn't matter. It's the individual with the choices, bra, no bra, or anything, the choices that they make that really matters.
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that you said that is the most important, and I will end this question with the answer of this question with that, is that even though fashion is charged and has been it has been a source of contested discourse for a really long time, it is also the biggest tool to change it, right? So it has been, and it will always be, and their designers know that. And so any sort of progress that we see when it comes to gender, but also race and anything that we're discussing right now, comes from design itself. Okay, let's see, what other questions do we have? Calvin says, where I live, one of the directions of fossil fuel economy is heading in light of the difficulties of pipeline construction, as well as the push for environmentalism? Could be putting these materials to a use outside of burning them for energy, example given creating advanced carbon materials. What precautions should we consider when conveying a narrative for the public so that it's no mistakenly associated with the dirtiness of fossil fuels? So I think what Calvin is asking is, can we boost the fossil fuel economy while at the same time being, I'm actually not sure what Calvin is asking. So maybe if you want to clarify in the chat, Calvin, that would be.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time understanding it either. It's interesting, but yeah, if you can clarify it further. And in the meantime, we can go to another one.
Sure. Okay. So Andrea, do you think fashion will become more sustainable, not buying as much as the demise of fast fashion? I think Paola has talked about this already. I think we both have. And it's a complicated, I don't think there's like a yes or no answer to this, but I do think, as I said at the very beginning of this chat, that I'm quite hopeful at the kind of emphasis on craft that is happening out of obligation, but also out of people's mindfulness towards the environmental crisis and also the economic crisis. So I hope, yes, I hope that because we have had to sort of like bring everything down to the local, and because things have started at least during these few months, have started becoming a little bit more, as Paola said, homemade, or also like, locally made, things can become a bit more sustainable. A lot of brands are also, trying. I know that H&M has made this promise that by 2030, everything that they make will be recycled. I think it's 2030, but please correct me if I'm wrong. So my hope is yes, but we'll see. What do you think, Paola?
Well, I think there's different types of sustainability, right? One sustainability is the one that deals with the environment, but then there's also the sustainability of the labor market. And, it would be irresponsible if we told you that we know and that we have an answer to your question, because one thing that we've learned is that we live in very complex systems. So fast fashion equals bad, but it also employs millions of people in some countries. If we stopped employing these people, would they go hungry? Can the industry invest in teaching other professions or reforming the system? So it's not enough to stop buying fast fashion. There needs to be something that takes into account the systemic refraction and consequences of our choices. So I think that that's the most important thing that we can do. We want to protest, we want to change the world, but in order to do so, we need to learn that we live in complex systems. And that's something that I could not stress more, that being righteous does not mean being drastic. It means being thoughtful and deep in understanding how we can change things.
I think that's really, really well said. And Ocampo is actually asking a similar question to what you were saying. He's basically saying there's been an increase in online buying. What are your thoughts? And that precisely goes to the complexity of the systems in which we live. And, even though online buying can contribute to not only waste, but also sort of like the globalization of the market that is oppressing a lot of people locally, at the same time, it's creating thousands and thousands of jobs. And at the same time, we really can't leave our house at the moment. So like people really need to buy online. So I think that really shows how complex the system is. And that's why I know, Paola, like for you, the term sustainable, you don't really like it as much, because I think in many ways it sort of like simplifies a lot of the issues that we're discussing. And I think,
well, I do like it if one thinks really about what sustainable means, right? So sustainable means, can it be sustained, right? So, and it's so that's, if you think about it that way, it's a great term, because then it encompasses everything. If instead it becomes a way to say green, then I don't. But it really is, once again, about understanding the implications of what we say and do.
Yeah, totally. So I'm seeing actually here a question in Spanish from Maria that has to do with what we were discussing before about sort of like what you were saying, Paola, about gender fluidity. She says, do you think that the fact that there are no divisions in the stores, so men, women, could possibly help stop differentiating the genres and the garments that separate us? So I guess in the same way as genderless bathrooms could not a differentiation in stores make it easier for us to sort of like embrace gender neutral clothing or more fluid clothing. And I think sure, why not?
Yeah, it would be great. And I was thinking, going back to the examples that we had in items, we had from the same period, the 60s, we have the Le Smoking by Saint Laurent, so androgynous. And then we had Rudi Gernreich. And Rudi Gernreich had these like bodysuits that were knitted, and they were the same for women and for men. You know, the knitwear would just adapt to the curves of the body. That was really extreme, and it was almost monastic. But, you know, if in the past like 7 years, genderless stores, I remember when Selfridges hired Faye Too Good to design this like genderless part of the department store. If at that time it was like a curiosity, right now it's becoming more normal. Not yet in department stores, because, you know, when you really want to cater to the mainstream, that kind of binary, or maybe tertiary, quaternary, because there's the gender and then there's the age divisions, which also makes me so angry. But, you know, so that is still necessary. But in more advanced stores, I like the fact that everything comes together.
Yeah, and I think you said something that made me think, and that's important, is that the sort of like fluidity in clothing and is nothing new. It's something that has been explored in all different types of cultures for many different years. It's just a matter of how we approach it. And it's funny that like it continues being seen as a new thing, even though it's not necessarily that. So I think as we maybe embrace sort of like a less Western-centric view of design and of design history, maybe it will also become a bit easier for us to kind of embrace that sort of fluidity that Paola was talking about. Okay, so we have 2 minutes left. Do you think we should answer another question, Paola, or what do you think? There's one from Rudy, another one from Rudy. Has the future of outerwear been changed if we are going outside less and wearing coats and jackets less frequently?
I guess so, but I don't know if we're gonna go out less. You know, I mean, being out is better than being inside. Either you're inside in your own home, or it's better if you want to meet other people to be outside. So maybe not, but it's very fascinating. I want to see where, you know, whenever steam builds, then there needs to be some valves to let it off. So I'm wondering what those valves will be. Will we have like amazing outerwear? Will it be the masks? I don't know. It's interesting. You know, I've been dying for a manicure, you know, for instance, but that used to be my guilty pleasure. Now, not anymore. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting to see what's.
Yeah. And as I think you've said many times, it's not just about function, right? So sometimes you just like want to wear that thing that you have in your in your closet, and sometimes you just want to buy that beautiful thing or that perfectly designed thing. And I'm sure people will continue to buy those things because good design comes in all forms. But yeah, we'll see what happens. Okay, so I think that with that we might have to conclude this office hours. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us and for your really exciting and thoughtful questions. So one thing to keep in mind, you will receive a short survey after this to help inform future office hours and other virtual course offerings. So if you really want to do this again, please be sure to let us know. And in the meantime, we would love to keep the conversation going. So as always, please continue sharing with us and posting in the forums. We keep, both Paola and I, but also our wonderful colleagues in education, continue to keep an eye on the forums, and we constantly reply. So keep going because it's really fascinating. And thank you so much. And thank you to everyone.
Yeah, and let's give them a shout out, you know, so Kelly Cannon, Sarah Bodinson, Howard Deitch, you know, just name them all. Who are we missing? I mean, there are many, but maybe you can find the credits. Oh, Alethea Rockwell, that's right. Mark Gibson, so Hunter. Yeah, so they're great. There's a whole team behind the scenes that is working for you. So thank you very much for following us. Thank you for following the course online. And I hope we'll have many more chances to learn from you all. Bye-bye. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Paola. I love you.
Love you too.